association. And of course, from this connection, we'll obtain a cursor. So it says connection, this connection, after you have established the connection, give me a cursor. That means give me a way to look at your data. So a cursor is going to behave like an object or like a lens for us to receive the table of data if we do a select, or to sort of pipe in our SQL command. So we're going to sort of send a command like select, right, through the cursor. And since cursor is derived from connection, the cursor will talk to connection. We don't talk to connection. We talk to the cursor. So we tell cursor, run this SQL statement like select. So this cursor will do the right thing, send it across to SQLite, and SQLite will access the database and read in the correct thing. And the data is going to come back in the return trip via the cursor. So we will have to read the cursor to sort of tease out the data, to get the data. So the cursor behaves a little bit like a file handle when we say open file name, comma, read, right? And set it to be equated with fs. So fs equals to open file name, comma, the string r to read the file. So fs is the file handle object, and then we can use fs.read to read in data from the file. So the cursor, it's not the same object as file handle, but the cursor is going to behave something like that. We're going to say something like cursor fetch. Instead of read, we say fetch. Try to grab, fetch and get the data in. So I'm going to show you the code, but this is the big picture now. All right. So to read in, we send the command through the cursor and wait for the data to come back, and then we read from the cursor as well. To write data into the database, we send the command through the cursor, insert or update, remember, and with the data going along, and then wait for nothing, maybe a status code or something, basically saying, how many rows affected and stuff like that. So it's very much everything is done through the cursor. Therefore, cursor is something that you have to get good with, get acquainted with. And if the English meaning of cursor, the blinking cursor, is getting in the way for you to understand clearly, just think of the cursor as SQL's way of saying file handle or access handle. That means through this object, then you can access the data on this database file. Now, in general, your Python program is going to look something like this. Okay, so it will have 3 to 4 sections. The mandatory one is definitely the import, right? You must have the import, otherwise you cannot gain access to SQLite 3. I will alias it as SQL, okay? But some program codes like to just keep it as it is. So import SQLite 3, everywhere you will see SQLite 3. The 3 means version 3. It's good to, in my opinion, it's good to have an alias here as SQL, because we don't know, maybe SQLite 4 is much more efficient, SQLite 5 is super duper, and by then we simply say import SQLite 5 as SQL, so the rest of your programs don't need to change. So I think there's a little bit of advantage there if you use a standard a constant alias. Okay, now next is the database file name. So I say DB file name, and it has to end with .db as a standard extension for SQLite database. To open the database, in SQL speak, we say establish a connection. Okay, so we don't open the database, we connect to the database, because database in some sense is always there, right? So we will say SQL connect to this database, upon which it will return a value, which is what we have seen, the connection object. The connection object talks about the relationship or the connecting of this portal, this access, this object with the file in the operating system. So that is a mandatory one, right? You have to open it. And of course, the last one is also mandatory, even though some codes for illustration or for quick discussion simply ignore it. And SQLite will tend to do the right thing for you. If you forget to close, it tries to close for you. But it's good practice to, whenever you have an open, you have a close. Whenever you have a connect, you have a, by right, a disconnect, but here a close as well. So I strongly encourage you to keep the yellow portion and the white portion. Those are mandatory. Next is that this green part is where you do a lot of your work. You can insert data, insert update, you can do select, right? And then you will, what you do is this. After getting a connection, you must obtain the cursor. So I say CUR is the variable name to hold the cursor object that is returned by connection dot cursor. All right, see this clearly? Our cursor is derived from this connection. You might, although I don't expect you to, even in commercial applications, we seldom, not impossible, but it's not like a frequent thing. But if you were to open 3 or 4 connections at the same time, you will have 3 or 4 different cursors because each cursor deals with its own connection. Yeah, okay, so we derive the cursor from connection. We don't say SQL dot cursor, we say connection dot cursor. Once you have successfully obtained the cursor, you have complete read-write access to the database. So, for example, you can perform some reading, but you can perform issue command by using cursor.execute. So normally we'll run cursor.execute first, and then we'll fetch one or fetch all. Fetch one means fetch one row from the resulting select. Fetch all means get me all the rows, whatever the select has selected, get me all of them into Python's memory. Okay, so we execute one command, or we may have those multiple lines of SQL statements separated by semicolons. Then you say execute many. No, sorry, then execute script, because that becomes a SQL script. The execute many we'll see in a while, where we need to insert, update multiple rows and all that. So execute is to issue command like create table, change the table, drop the table. Execute many, typically used for insert, update for multiple rows modifications. And execute script is for multiple statements of SQL separated by semicolons. This part is a must if you are performing writes, especially. So when we are inserting or updating, those are writes, writing or changing, modifying the values in the database. This is a must. So that means if you don't commit, the values or the rows there will not be committed to the database. In other words, it is the original database is not modified. Only upon executing this commit will SQLite actually sort of paints over the existing database and performs the actual writing. So you're committed to writing it, and therefore the change will be permanent. Okay, so this is a must, especially when you're writing data into the database. So by and large, you will perform execute, then fetch, and perhaps execute, then commit it when you're performing insert or update. And then you will repeat the green and the cyan maybe a few times before you close, execute the white block. So in general, your Python script will look like this structure. Okay, yellow, green, cyan, white, or yellow, green, cyan, green, cyan, green, cyan, repeat a couple of times, and then white. Okay, so if you're missing any section, it tends to be not exactly right. Look over it. If you know what you're doing, then that's fine. But oftentimes it's going to suggest that something is not going on correctly. Okay, so keep this in mind when you are performing your Python SQL coding.